I'm John Dennis. I'm running against Nancy Pelosi.
We have the most beautiful state and one of the most beautiful places in the world, and people are leaving.
I'm gonna catch you when all the cameras aren't around, and I'm gonna you up. I'm tired.
He's the chairman of the San Francisco GOP, and he's running against House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Step back, everyone.
Hello, hello. Come on in. Hope you had a good weekend. Come on in. I'm gonna vamp here a little bit while we're waiting for people to come in. Hey Mario, where do I see me on? Oh, there it is on Facebook. So I got to click on this, see more. But I'd like to see the comments on Facebook. How do I do that? What's that? Okay. Oh, okay. Good. I'll just mute this. Well, it's already muted, so, but... All right, come on in. Hey, yeah, so, we're making some progress here on the technology side. This is actually much better, don't you think, Mario?
I agree.
Yeah. All right, so I hope you had a good weekend. I spent much of the weekend sitting in front of the computer because the California Republican Party had its convention. We normally meet 3 times every 2 years. This was an important convention because we were re-electing officers and addressing some issues in our bylaws. And in any event, so spent quite a bit of time, going to events and meetings and that sort of thing. Which is unfortunate because the weather is pretty nice here, but okay. These are the prices you pay. But but I have to say, last night I had an unpleasant experience on Twitter, and that involved a local elected official, and then another guy who's actually an employee, a servant public servant of Oakland across the bay. So if you go on my Twitter feed at Real John Dennis, you'll see what the tiff was all about. But it actually triggered a kind of a larger thought process about everything that's happening in the United States and how San Francisco is sort of it really is a canary in the coal mine. I can't think of a better analogy. Canaries, they used to take them down into coal mines because coal mines get natural gas leaks, and the gas is odorless, and it has no smell, and you can't tell, but it's very deadly. And they used to bring canaries down there because if canaries started reacting, they knew that there was a gas leak and that they were under threat. And so San Francisco is on the cutting edge of everything. I mean, think about what's going on out here. We have, tech business so powerful. You have the companies like Facebook and Google and Twitter and Apple. These are really powerful companies. Some people say, Scott Adams has said this, that they're more powerful than the government itself at this stage of the game. I don't know if that's entirely true, but it's an argument. It's a conversation to have. Are they more powerful? They're up there. They're multinational. They happen to be in America for their own convenience, but Google probably gets most of its revenues outside of the United States. In the case of Twitter, they apply foreign law to American citizens. So, like, for example, and this, by the way, I'm not completely versed in this, but I think I'm pretty dead on. in the Joe Rogan podcast, when he had Jack Dorsey and Vijay Gaddy, who runs their kind of standard stuff, and Tim Pool was also there as sort of a questioner of Twitter. Vijay Gaddy said, we had to boot this one person off Twitter because she was quote unquote misgendering someone, which is, calling someone who transitioned from male to female, kept referring to that person as a man. And she cited, I think, German law for the reason why that person needed to be booted, even though the woman was living in Canada. So anyway, San Francisco's a canary in the coal mine. So let me fast forward to what happened. Actually, before I get into it, let me make a couple of quick plugs here. Hey, so please follow me on Twitter at RealJohnDennis. Subscribe on YouTube. We'll keep you updated on the campaign with some fresh YouTube only content starting this week and beyond. In fact, starting today. And then we have, if you can follow us there, if you can follow Instagram, Real John Dennis. You can also follow us. You saying something to me, Mario? Oh yeah, we're doing podcasts now. Yeah, so, Apple and Spotify. We're on Apple. Isn't that great? And YouTube John Dennis Report. That's the one I really want to push. It's so slow. It's not even getting anywhere. But anyway, we got to do that and get that going, and we'll keep you up on the campaign. In fact, Mario, remind me today. I'm going to do a special YouTube video only on an update on the campaign in San Francisco. Okay. So let me just take a step back for a second and kind of give you my background. Somebody was saying to me the other day, "Oh, are you just opposed to Pelosi?" Well, of course. I understand that there are people who are. That's a legitimate question, even though it came from kind of a snotty point of view and someone who's probably not a supporter. But I think it's a legitimate question because a lot of people are running right now just to oppose high-profile candidates, and. It's fun. I have to say, it's more fun. I mean, even in an uphill battle, like trying to defeat somebody like Nancy Pelosi, at least you get to take positions against a high-profile person and give hope to people across the country, because some of these high-profile people like Pelosi have a direct impact on your lives. So I'm happy to do it, but I don't just oppose Nancy Pelosi. And as I mentioned last week on this on these streams, I never really found her personality. I didn't really care that much about that. Although she did some things last week that were irritating, and that for which I just thought they were just personally abhorrent. But that was never really my motivation. The truth is, I oppose her because I have a diametrically different point of view of what the nature of government ought to be and what its role is in our lives. And, I feel like, government is the only organization in society that reserves the right to use force. Walmart can't send you an invoice and say, pay up or we're going to send the police to your house, even though you didn't order the service. But government allows themselves to do that. And it's an awesome power. It's a very dangerous power. It's one that we have to watch carefully, because as government gets bigger and bigger, your liberty, which is what this country was founded on, is fortunately been a word that's been relegated to a different century, it feels like. But your liberty is tied up, is directly threatened, and has an inverse relationship to the size of government. And these people who get elected are so, particularly from the left, who want to grow government because they think the government can offer solutions, are so full of themselves that they feel like, oh, I can make your life better if you just allow me to force you to do stuff. Meanwhile, they've shown that they can do anything but that. They can just destroy lives and make things terrible for people. And I can get into a fuller discussion of that another time. But that's my goal. I mean, what I want you to do is to have as much control over your own life as possible, to have as much liberty, to have as little interference from the government, so that you can live well. And by the way, as it turns out, when people are allowed to decide what they want to do with their lives, with their resources, with their time, their assets, their energy, we end up, increasing our quality of life, improving our quality of life. As long as contracts are honored and people don't, initiate force against other people. I mean, these are sort of fundamental things that are part of America that have really made the difference and made us the country, the wealthiest country, in the world, declining, I'd say, but have been, the wealthiest country, and so, as government grows, there's an almost invariable direction towards abusing your liberty, and that's my big problem with Pelosi. She wants power, and to have power, she has to have government grow, and it's always at the expense of your liberty. I want you to also notice that during the Trump administration, there wasn't, under Obama and when Pelosi was in charge, and even under Bush, who didn't have the same feeling about government as I do. If I can be allowed to criticize another Republican, and I'm not asking permission because I'm going to do it anyway, because I'm not a big fan of Bush. And in any event, you notice that things happen like domestic spying started under those regimes starting back in the early 2000s. You notice that didn't expand under Trump. Trump wasn't for that. Trump criticized the press, for example, but never really took a frontal assault against him, unlike Barack Obama, who had James Rosen arrested, who had who was the guy from the New York Times arrested. I mean, he was charging them with the Espionage Act. I mean, that was a frontal assault on freedom of the press. And you didn't see that out of Trump. And it's another reason why I like Trump and why I think that libertarians should have liked Trump more. I mean, I'll admit, as the libertarians, presidents, libertarian actions by presidents is a pretty low bar because there aren't that many. But Trump was pretty good on a lot of issues, on some of the really big issues, and that's not true. But anyway, let's swing back over to San Francisco. San Francisco Democrats completely control the government. They control everything. It's not just that they have the mayor's office and the board of supervisors. We don't have San Francisco and a county is the same, so we don't have a city council. We have a county board of supervisors. It's not like they just control those, but there isn't an elected Republican official in San Francisco. Our last elected official got knocked out of office 7 years ago. And it was a sort of a minor position on the BART board. I mean, while the Golden Gate Bridge and the trolleys and the Bay Bridge and all the big infrastructure, Hetch Hetchy, the water supply, which San Francisco is so proud of, were all delivered and built under Republican administrations. There isn't a Republican who's responsible for any of the mess that you see out in San Francisco. All the pictures you see of homeless people and needles and feces on the street, they can't touch Republicans. They have nothing to do with it. You have people in this town and in this state are still blaming Ronald Reagan because he stopped funding to mental institutions, 40 years ago. They're still trying to blame, Ronald Reagan for that. It's ridiculous. They own these problems. They are responsible for these problems. And in fact, it's not just that they dominate, the local government where we have no elected Republican officials, and there are probably only a handful of Republicans even working in City Hall, and they're closet cases at that. But Democrats outnumber Republicans 8-1 in San Francisco. 8-1. So I've mentioned on these live streams before that we have, I'm sorry, let me just take a couple of looks at your comments here. I've mentioned on these live streams before that, there are Republicans who work at tech companies and they just, they don't want to abandon their beliefs. So they, little organizations come together and they meet in like lofts in Soma, in South of Market area, or they, go places like in apartments and have parties and stuff just to socialize amongst themselves because they're afraid that it might get out that they're Republicans and they'll have to deal with it from a career perspective. And so, we're in a city where Democrats outnumber Republicans 8-1 and people are concerned about their careers. You would think that, Democrats would be like, Republicans are not that relevant. There's no need to to go after them. Oh no, Oh no, you'd be mistaken in that regard. I mean, for a group of people, the Democrats are constantly talking about bullying. They're the biggest freaking bullies I've ever seen. I mean, I've just never seen anything like it. You've got, people who, think nothing of just sort of disparaging Republicans as if they're subhuman. And I find the whole bullying thing, by the way, remarkably unmasculine, if you ask me. People complaining about being bullied. Men complaining about being bullied. Okay. All right. Listen, I guess so. I mean, I suppose it's, these are things that happen. They got to be addressed. But anyway, but we are bullied. I mean, that is the truth. So last night a little exchange happens. A guy goes on, and this actually the trigger for this was, I remember being in the Board of Supervisors chamber a few years back, and there was a question and answer period. And there was a long line of people who were local San Franciscans who were waiting to address an issue, and they get 2 minutes each. So it was a long line, people waiting, and I'm sitting I wasn't waiting in line. I was just sitting there listening and viewing what was going on, and there were people in line who were saying stuff like, "Oh yeah, that's good for white people. Yeah, white people get away with that." And I'm like, and just like saying really harsh things about white people. I'm like, looking at these people like, when did it become okay in public to attack people based on an immutable characteristic, i.e. the color of their skin? This is going back like 6-7 years ago. And I'm like, wow. And that, acceptance is now kind of a national problem, right? And it's also become, acceptable to disparage Republicans. I won't say all of the local politicians, but many of them. And so last night there was a guy who we have a district attorney here who's been an abject failure. I mean, a disaster. Last year, overdoses of people dying of overdoses in the city of San Francisco went up 70%. We've had murders here at a level that was historic. You can't even imagine. Right now there's a epidemic of people breaking into people's garages. It's a racket. These guys go in, they break through a window, they pull the garage door up, they know what they're looking for, they grab whatever they can, and they hit the road. And it's going on. And by the way, in the best neighborhoods in town. Never saw that before. That's a whole new thing. And it's all driven by a lax approach to law enforcement by the San Francisco district attorney, who was Soros funded and whose parents are in prison because they were part of a terrorist attack, called the by a group called the Weather Underground. We've talked about this before. This current San Francisco district attorney is a disaster. So a local guy who happens to be a Republican put together a recall effort to recall him. It was something a lot of people were thinking about. The San Francisco district attorney is wildly unpopular. So this is going on, and the people who support him, of course, are freaking out about it. But this local guy who lives here but works over in the East Bay, up as a public servant, by the way, gets on and says, attacking Chesa Bowden, this district attorney, is unfair. And by the way, it's driven by all Republicans, only like Republicans, and like Republicans are less than human, and they're Trump supporters, and just just going after Republicans for being Republican, and like their opinions don't count. As it turns out, by the way, almost half of the signatures that have been gathered so far for the recall effort have come from non-Republicans. There aren't that many Republicans in San Francisco. So, there are, he's going to get recalled, and it's not going to be driven because of Republicans. There aren't enough Republicans to sign the document in San Francisco to get this guy recalled, but they're going to get the signature. So in any event, I just went after the guy and said, "Hey, look, you're a public servant, and you're attacking Republicans, and is it possible that in your job you might be discriminating against Republican because you treat them and you talk about them with such contempt?" And he freaked, and I did a hashtag, fire Brandon Harami. Fire him. They want to do cancel culture? Okay, let's do cancel culture. Fire him. He's disparaging people he's supposed to be serving. Does he treat them as less than human and less than citizens when he's doing his job? Well, that freaked him out when I put that hashtag, and he like called in the backup, because clearly his defense of this Chesapeake was driven by Chesapeake. He's like an insider, and he went out there to make this attack, probably at the request of somebody in the Democratic scene. Well, so this guy Brandon brings in a local supervisor, Dean Preston, and we get into a whole exchange. And I just was trying to get the point across to these guys that you're not going to treat us like subhumans. I'm not putting up with this. Listen, maybe past chairman just thought, that's not a fight I'm going to take on. I'm going to take that fight on. I'm not allowing us to be treated, because it's dangerous as hell. Listen, there's a website out there right now. I don't even want to say the name of it, that takes public information. So listen, it's public information about donors, but they actually go and take the people who donated to Trump and they put them on a website, and then you just have to click on your location and zoom in, and you can see all the people who donated to Donald Trump and their addresses, their names, addresses, and the amounts they gave. I mean, these people literally drew a map to people who donated to Donald Trump. What do they expect to happen from that? What is the point of doing that? What is the point of that? I got 80-year-old women who donated to Trump who are like, I'm terrified to leave my house. They have me on a website and a map to my address. What are these people thinking? And so for some supervisor to get into it and start protecting this kind of behavior, forgive me, but I can't believe it. I'm up in arms about this. You don't get to harangue and harass and belittle and demean people who have a different political point of view. As a public servant, you don't get to do that. And not only that, but it's worse than that, because if you contribute to it, and by the way, this is all not happening in a vacuum. You have Secretary of Labor Robert Reich calling for truth and reconciliation commissions. You have AOC calling for truth and reconciliation commissions for Trump supporters. Enablers, they call them. Enabling what? This enabling sounds like you committed a crime by supporting Donald Trump. What is this? We have today, USA Today, newspaper on the website. There's an editorial, an opinion piece from a professor at a prestigious college, Middlebury, calling for domestic terrorism laws, specifically aimed at white people. What are we doing here? What's happening? So, anyway, it's all tied in together. That's why I'm saying that, when guys like on the local level, you have to watch San Francisco, because the things that happen here, that kind of contempt for people who are, have a dominant position in politics, contempt that they have for the other party, is the beginning of something very dangerous. And, going back to the initial discussion, the premise of this stream today, which is that government is, always has the prospect of abusing your liberties and growing at the expense of your liberty. I'm not talking about small stuff here now. I'm talking about big stuff in the direction that we're moving in, and it motivates me to stay involved in government and to make sure that we hold people accountable. I mean, Nancy Pelosi comes across to Democrats here as middle of the road. That's why she's acceptable. That's why she gets challenged from the left, the far left, I'd say, because she's not left enough, progressive enough for them. But she's dangerous enough in the sense that she is. She never says anything about these kinds of things. She doesn't really care whether people feel threatened. She said, well, she released one statement, I think in 2019, that she doesn't support, Antifa and BLM using violence. But, if I were in her position, if there were guys on the right who were out there rioting day in, day out, month in, month out, burning down cities and attacking them, I would get up in front of TV and say, hey, look, just want to make this clear. You doing that stuff, for your own benefit. You don't represent me, and I dare I say, speak on behalf of the Democrat Party. You don't represent Democrats. And in fact, if I was Nancy Pelosi, I'd gather a bunch of other high-profile, Democrats in and have that press conference and put it out there and say, listen, go do what you want, but we are not supporting you. We support law and order, and we support law enforcement actually arresting anybody who commits property crime, assault, looting, arson, any of that stuff. But you never heard that happen. And in fact, if you go back to a year ago, almost a year ago, well, not quite to the day, but maybe a year and a week ago or so, or maybe it was almost a year ago today, I was on the Laura Ingraham show. Yeah, it was almost a year ago to the day, where I made this very same point at the end. I mean, I probably should have led with it on that call, but I mean, here I am a year later talking about the same thing, and things have not gotten better. They've kind of gotten a little worse, as you would expect when you have a Democrat president and when Donald Trump is out of office. So, my big fear is of a totalitarian America. I mean, is it possible? Sure. I mean, we have a country that is, has all the potential in the world to be great, but has dug a gigantic hole for itself. And it's something why I stay in politics is to make sure that doesn't happen. But it's something I'm really afraid of when you have, leaders like Nancy Pelosi are perfectly willing to let it happen, perfectly willing to let spy agencies, spy on every American without saying a word. Notice she never said anything about the Snowden revelations, at least condemning the intelligence agencies. You don't want to know why? Because she knew about it all along. She doesn't care. So anyway, that's my big concern, and that's my thing for today. And I just, for these guys who are in city government, and it's not all of them by any stretch, but for the ones who are obtuse about these concerns, I'd ask you to take your heads out of your asses. Wake up, because this is an enormous problem that threatens all of us. And if you stand by and don't defend the bigger issues, defend, freedom of speech and law and order and those kinds of things, ultimately it could be you or your family one day who is the target of these kinds of attacks. We've seen it over and over again. One day you're storming the Bastille, and the next day your head's in the guillotine. So in any event, that's my big concern. That's one of the reasons why I'm so motivated about politics, is because I'd like to think that in my generation's watch, we are not going to let the United States, this amazing gift in the history of this of the world, to be squandered and to be lost. So I'm just concerned that as things go down, we're going to have more corruption, more lawlessness, more unequal treatment by people in charge. Let's try to avoid that. Let's see what we can do. Let's see if we can turn things around. I don't think a big multi-topic. What was the other topic today? What's that? Oh yeah. Well, listen, you get the view. I mean, I could go a little bit longer on being a Republican in San Francisco, but I think you guys get the general idea. Let's take a quick look here and see if there are any. Thanks, I appreciate that, Mr. Robinson. Thank you so much. Yeah. So, fire people for their political beliefs. I mean, that by the way, I'm not sure what your position is there, but I mean, that's what happens in San Francisco. I mean, we have people who are afraid to come out as Republicans. Shoot, I can think of guys I don't want to even say, but they are part of a system in San Francisco. I know Republicans who keep a low profile. I mean, they're incredibly courageous to keep their party affiliation because, there are databases out there. You could look up, if you're connected to one of these databases, you can look up somebody's party affiliation in like 2 seconds. And I think that's what, that's something to be afraid of. So in any event, I think that's it for today. I really appreciate everything. Were there any comments in here? No? Okay. All right, guys, we will chat with you tomorrow. Until then, thanks for allowing me to get this off my chest, and also for allowing me to explain the premise about why I'm in politics and what the fight is, what the real fight is in the end. So I appreciate you sticking with me today. And please, again, follow us on our various social media. They're in They're all listed here on Facebook and on Twitter. John Dennis Report on YouTube. And anyway, thanks again. We will see you soon.